We begin with breaking news. The Reverend Jesse Jackson has died. The 84-year-old civil rights activist, Baptist minister, and two-time presidential candidate passed away earlier this morning, according to a statement from his family and Rainbow Push. The Jackson family wrote, quote, "Our father was a servant leader, not only to our family, but to the oppressed, the voiceless, and the overlooked around the world. His unwavering belief in justice, equality, and love uplifted millions, and we ask you to honor his memory by continuing the fight for the values he lived by." Jackson died peacefully, surrounded by his loved ones. No cause of death was given, Reverend Al. That he had been ill for a while, but this moment, very difficult no matter what.
Very difficult. He had been ill with Parkinson's and palsy for the last several years. It had continued to diminish. I would go every couple of months and see him. I went, especially we go on Christmas Day after we feed the hungry here in New York. And my daughters and I went a few weeks ago. And he couldn't talk, he couldn't walk for the last several months. So at one level, you didn't want to see him suffer, but at another level, you grappling with him passing. His family called me in the middle of the night, said he had passed. We had prayer before they took his body out of the room where he was. I talked to his son, Yusef, and Jesse Jr. But I think people should realize Jesse Jackson helped change American politics. He changed civil rights. He brought proportional representation into the primary. Before him, you could win by 2 votes and you take all the delegates in the state. He changed that, which led to a Barack Obama being able to be nominated. He led to many changes. He kept Dr. King's dream going, and we have to keep his going. So I think that I've known him since my mother brought me to Operation Breadbasket through Reverend William Jones when I was 12 years old, and I've been around Reverend Jackson 59 years. So it's a long time, and we've gone through a lot together, and I'll miss him greatly.
Rev, I'm so sorry for the loss of your friend this morning. Appreciate you being here to talk about it. And you mentioned his connection to Dr. King. I mean, he was there on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel on April 4th, 1968, when Dr. King was assassinated. Can you just talk about his place in the Reverend Jackson's place in the movement after that, when it was looking for who is the leader now?
When Reverend Jackson was the youngest person on staff, and what a lot of people don't understand, Dr. King's organization, Southern Christian Leadership Conference, was a Southern regional organization. He went to Chicago and started dealing with urban issues to try and nationalize. And there he met theology student, Reverend Jesse Jackson, who was in 26, 27. Reverend Jackson was the youngest member, then later put on his staff a year later. And he was about 12 years younger than Dr. King, so he's almost the next generation. So he used to always tease me and others, Lamel McMorris, Reverend James Meeks and others. And y'all are a generation behind me like I was Dr. King. And he would tell us stories of how he was being trained by Dr. King. So his job was as difficult as the job that preceded him, is to keep the Voting Rights Act in, because every 5 to 6 years you had to reenact it. It is now under threat. To keep some of the wins of the civil rights movement of the 60s was to maintain it in the 70s and 80s and 90s. That was as difficult as it was to get in the first place, and he was the one that was out front doing that.
You know, Rev, there may be a few people that remember now, but in 1986, he organized politically in a way that no civil rights leader had organized before, and actually helped the Democrats do extremely well in the middle of Reaganism. And the Democrats had a huge win in 1986, and all fingers pointed towards Jesse Jackson and his organization. So he really knew politically how to organize, and that was followed up 2 years later by his own historic run for president. Talk about what that meant, not only to the civil rights movement, but to you and eventually to Barack Obama, who would run successfully in 2008.
He ran in '84, and in '84 he registered a lot of voters that led exactly to what you're talking about, Joe. In '86, the midterm elections at that time, these newly registered voters that had been energized by the Jackson 84 campaign came out in states that had not seen that kind of turnout and literally changed the Congress. So in 84, Jackson's run helped to put the Democrats in position in 86, led on to 88, where he had the historic run. And I think that it was his historic run that was able to change proportional delegates in the convention. Had those rules not been changed, Barack Obama would not have been nominated some 20 years later, because Hillary Clinton won in all the major states, and she would have won or take all. The fact that he would get his proportion kept him in the running to where he was the nominee. What he meant to me personally, he taught me activism. He would tell me that preaching was not just having one church, it's being able to deal with the issues of the world, and that was the kind of way he taught me. And he was definitely the most definitive teacher in my life, including, he teased me, he used to do a show on CNN, Both Sides. He said he was training me for Politics Nation.
Rev, in 1988, he did well in the Democratic primary process. He came second in the nominating campaign. Why didn't he run again? I mean, having done so well in 88, did he then just decide, actually, you know what, I could do better outside of the strict political system, and he was this kind of informal diplomat that he could and founding Rainbow Nation? Did he feel he could just have more influence on American society, not in the traditional presidential running race structure?
He basically was not a politician. He was one that saw politics as a means, not an end. And he saw himself fighting in the social policy arena. He had accumulated such influence that he used it to help what he wanted to see done in terms of social policy. We had started seeing the country go back to racial profiling and immigration rights even then, and the rights of women. He felt he could be better with a broader context, and he was going global. He went and got hostages that no one else could get out of Iraq. Out of Iraq, he brought home hostages. He went and got Goodman out of Syria. And this had never been done in the civil rights movement, and never been done at that level. Jesse Jackson broke ground that no one had done. And then later, politically, he and his wife, Jacqueline Jackson, who's been the rock of the family, the rock of the movement, unspoken, but the rock, they were born and raised in the segregated South, and they put two of their sons in Congress. So his political legacy, two of his sons, one is in Congress now, another one running, Jesse Jr. is running again for Congress. To have Jackie and Jesse Jackson born in segregation, to put two sons in Congress in the span of their lifetime, shows how far America has come, but how far we yet need to go.
And again, just a reminder, Mika, of 1988 and what a significant campaign he had in 88 historically, following up on the history that was made in 86. Jackson came in second to Mike Dukakis, but beat out candidates future Vice President Al Gore, future President Joe Biden, and Dick Gephardt, and many others. Johnny Apple of the New York Times was so impressed that he called 1988 the year of Jackson. We obviously our thanks to him for all that he has done through the years for civil rights. And right now, though, our thoughts are with his family and loved ones who obviously hurting about the loss of Jesse Jackson, as are millions of people across America today.